I'm sorry?
Tell us something that we don't know about you, but we should.
You should probably know that you should reach me at Mr. Wonderful on Twitter. I don't know if anybody knows that, but now you do.
No harm in a shameless plug there. And last question, how did you get the nickname Mr. Wonderful?
I'm glad you asked. Well, I had a cat in college. When I was in college at Penn State, I had a cat, and his name was Mr. Wonderful. And while I was away traveling, my roommate left the door open in the middle of winter, and Mr. Wonderful ran away. And it was just kind of a joke, like, hey, you know, if you ever get into MMA, that should be your nickname, Mr. Wonderful. You know, and because my cat ran away, and I obviously am still upset about that, a little bit hurt. Mr. Wonderful, if you're out there, I love you. I love you.
And it stuck. Hey, appreciate people calling you wonderful. I only get it called annoying, so that's a good thing. Thanks so much for the time. We're looking forward to another exciting fight on April 10th. That does it from us. John, back to you.
All right, thanks, Molly. Nice to hear from a very charismatic Phil Davis. You know, so many people talk about who's going to take the torch from the guys like Chuck Liddell and Randy Couture. Well, how about Phil Davis and John Jones? You got two guys at 205 that right now look like potentially future UFC champions. All right, speaking of potential future UFC champions, how about Cain Velasquez? Well, if he's going to emerge with the win at UFC 110, he'll likely have to effectively employ the takedown, which he's done pretty well over his 7-fight career. So now, to show us how it's done, no, it's not Cain, but the former Michigan State Spartan, our own Rashad Evans, has the MMA 101.
Thanks, John. Today in MMA 101, we're going to go over a technique that actually made me very successful in my weight class, the double leg. Doing the double leg is all about the setup. So one thing I do for the setup with my double leg takedown is I'm trying to get my opponent to engage. When he engages, that's when I'm going to go for my shot. One thing I do to get one thing I do to set up, get him to engage is I let my hands go. I'm throwing the combination. I get him to punch back. Once he punches back, then I'm going underneath for the double leg. From this point right here, I'm going to turn the corner, and notice how I keep my head on his back, and I'm keeping it flexed, driving into him. If I get my neck lazy, I can get caught in the choke, and I stay in front, I will get caught in the choke. I'll keep my head stiff to the side with pressure, and I'm stepping out at an angle so I can take him over for the double leg. Folks, that's how you do the double leg.
He's destroyed every fighter thrown his way. Now heavyweight contender Cain Velasquez attempts to become the division's biggest threat as he battles former UFC and Pride heavyweight champion Antonio Minotauro Nogueira. Also, 10 years of dominance has solidified Vanderlei Silva as a true mixed martial arts legend. But Michael the Count Bisping plans on stealing his glory. The Ultimate Fighting Championship presents UFC 110, live Saturday, February 20th from Acer Arena in Sydney, Australia, only on pay-per-view.
April 24th, lock it in on your calendars. The WEC makes its pay-per-view debut at its unofficial home base, Arco Arena in Sacramento. The main event, the hometown hunk. Yup, I said it. Uriah Faber trying to get his belt back against the consensus 2009 Fighter of the Year, Jose Aldo Jr. UFC presents WEC 48. That's April 24th. And on the subject of that WEC pay-per-view, this email from MMA Nation, David wants to know, do you think some fans in the U.S. look past Jose Aldo because of Uriah Faber's popularity? Seems like new fans tend to do that with popular fighters. Kenny, you would know.
Well, I'm glad David didn't say hometown hunk, Uriah Faber, like John did. But, you know, Uriah Faber's the biggest name in the WEC. He's had the featherweight belt the longest. And because of that popularity, you know, people just don't know as much about him, don't know Jose Aldo as well as Uriah Faber. And for that reason, they may be overlooking him. But anyone who's seen Jose Aldo fight will not overlook him. That's for sure.
For a long time, Kenny, Uriah Faber was, and some would say right now, was and still is the face of the WEC. That's who they know. They don't, and Aldo, as good as he's been in the promotion, really didn't come out until he beat Mike Thomas Brown. So there's still some unfamiliarity with him.
Hey, if you need a push with the casual fans, just beat Uriah Febr on April 24th, and that should take care of it. All right. Finally, from Kenny in Granite City, Illinois, is the UFC being careless when assembling fight cards? If Marquardt Sonnen had been booked for UFC 112 instead of UFC 109, they could have bumped either guy to the main event. Now Chael cannot step in for Vitor Belfort due to injury.
And Kenny, one thing the UFC is never does is be careless. I mean, they really, a lot of planning and decisions go into making a card, and so they can't just have guys on the shelf. You know, Anderson Silva has to fight, Chael Sonnen has to fight, Damian Maia. These guys have to fight, and they want to fight regularly. You know, injuries happen, so that's just the way it is.
Absolutely. UFC 109 needed that co-main event with Marquardt and Sonnen. Couldn't strip that card completely bare. All right, more emails next week. It's MMA Live at ESPN.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, not just Phil Davis. We're on there as well. It is ESPN_MMA Live. And please also join us every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, the weekly MMA Live chat, exclusively yours at ESPN.com. All right, one thing left to do. We tap the canvas. It is prediction time for UFC 110. Kenny's starting to sweat and tremble. I can sense that.
My favorite thing to do.
Let's start at lightweight. Joe Stevenson against the Australian George Stoudemire. Who do you like?
Well, you know, I think it's going to be Joe Stevenson's experience that wins him this fight. It should be a close one, but I'm going to take Stevenson via game plan and experience.
I'm going to take Stevenson for the same reason, experience and improve boxing. That's the key.
All right, heavyweights. Mirko Cro Cop against Ben Rothwell.
I'm going to go with Rothwell. I think Cro Cop's heart isn't in it. Very talented fighter, but I think Rothwell is going to wear him down and probably finish him in the second round.
I see this being a stand-up fight, and I think Cro Cop is a better striker, so I'm going to go with Cro Cop.
All right, at 205, well, I respectfully disagree.
Okay.
But, at 205, Keith Jardine, the guy McNeil thinks is the gatekeeper, no questions about it, against Ryan Bader.
This is a tough fight for me. Again, I hear Jardine is looking phenomenal, but I'm going to have to go with the consistent Ryan Bader. I think he'll take this one by decision or by TKO.
I have to go with Bader as well. I know Keith Jardine is going into this fight under a lot of pressure. His future in the UFC is at stake.
All right, your co-main event, Wanderlei Silva taking on Michael Bisping. Kenny, who do you have?
This is a tough fight. I think Bisping's going to take this one. I think he needs to bring it into the second and third round. If this fight is ending early, I think Wanderlei Silva will take it. But I think Bisping, with his game plan, can get it done probably in the third round or by decision.
I think the weight cut is going to be a problem for Wanderlei, so I have to go with Michael Bisping.
Maybe, but the travel
and the travel as well, because we can't forget, guys, although Wanderlei Silva has traveled a lot, he used to fight a lot in Japan. This is a different type of weight cut for him. When he fought in Japan, he could pretty much show up at any weight he wanted to. These are different rules. He's showing up at 185. This is new for him. And the same goes, I guess, for Michael Bisping as well. But Bisping's also used to coming to the United States. Maybe not as experienced as Wanderlei Silva, but that travel is not only going to affect those guys, it's going to affect everybody on the card.
All right, and finally, your main event, which will happen at about 11 a.m. local time in Australia. That's a variable in and of itself. Minotauro Nogueira or Cain Velasquez?
I'm going to have to go with Cain Velasquez. I think this is kind of a changing of the guard. I'm a huge Minotauro fan, but it's hard to pick him when we've seen some inconsistent results. If we see the best Nogueira, the Nogueira that showed up against Randy Couture, I wouldn't be surprised to see Minotauro get the win. But I think he has his hands full with Cain Velasquez. I pick Velasquez by decision.
Nog does have his hands full. I think we will see the Nog who fought Randy Couture. I'm going with Big Nog.
Cain Velasquez's run to the title begins Saturday night in Australia. We'd like to thank Phil Davis and Steve Cofield for joining us, and all of you at ESPN UK, ESPN Pac Rim, and of course at our home base here at ESPN.com. Until next week, for Kenny Florian, Franklin McNeil, and Molly Caroline.